So we're back with another card review for the Titans mini set Fall of Uldurar. Today we got Shaman cards and we got Demon Hunter cards. These Shaman cards, I don't know. These Demon Hunter cards, at least one's pretty scary. So let's take a look here at the Infested Watcher. This is the Chaotic Tendril card for Shaman, a 4-mana 4/4 taunt. Death Rattle, get 2 1/1 Chaotic Tendrils. As you recall, those are the little scaling mini tiny baby Yogg-Saron's basically. And yeah, I mean, getting 2 is nice. We've only, like Warlock, you got 1 at a time. Seemed like you're really ever gonna get 1. Getting 2 at once, that's 4 total. That gets your random 1 cost spells a little bit higher. Shaman is also a class that can sometimes manipulate battle cries and do fancy things with battle cries, especially in wild formats. That could be a little bonus to your chaotic tendrils. That said, I still think this just doesn't look that good to me. The results on the chaotic tendrils still feel like they're gonna be very inconsistent, since you're just getting that 1 spell off the chaotic tendril. So the results are not going to do things you want directionally all that often. And yeah, getting 2 of them, like, yeah, it's nice to maybe play 2 in a turn to increase your chances of hitting the right sort of thing, whether that's removal, development, damage, card draw. You often want to hit one angle of that. It's still just not going to connect often enough. So 4-mana 4/4 is just a little bit too honest. Those just going back to hand, more mana to spend on not exactly exciting plays. So listen, I don't want to write off all of these cards too much until we see like future chaotic tendril support. Maybe Yogg-Saron comes along and he does some awesome thing based on the number of chaotic tendrils you've played, and that's worth it. But man, it would have to be so insane, because all of these cards just feel a little bit too straightforward and honest, and the tendrils themselves just don't feel like exciting plays to me yet. So I'm not seeing it quite yet for the Infested Watcher. Super awesome looking card and artwork and stuff, just not a power level I think that drives a lot. So moving on here to Conductivity, a new 2-mana nature spell. This is kind of like a mini Zentimo. You remember that card of old? The next spell you cast this turn also targets adjacent minions. So there are a handful of different spells in Shaman right now that you might care about using this for. Stuff like Blazing Transmutation. You could evolve multiple of your minions on board. You've got Cold Storage. You could like freeze your opponent's multiple minions and get extra copies of those, which is kind of fun. You've got Death Weaver Aura. If you had a board, you could develop additional 3/2 zombie death rattles. And then the big ones are probably where this gets most exciting, like Jive Insect. You get 3 Ragnaroses, play a bunch of little piranhas, a Conductivity, and then Jive Insect into multiple Ragnaroses. I mean, that's like a kind of OTK, maybe. Like, it could potentially be 24 damage on an empty board. So I wouldn't totally write this one off. The problem is Jive Insect is a one-of. You got to have the board. It might be a little bit inconsistent. And there's also like Criminal Lineup, but this is probably not very good. Board space becomes an issue pretty quickly on that one. But technically, that's also a possible option. And of course, future options might exist as well. So ultimately, if you're spending 2 mana, you're going to want the results of that to be pretty good. I will say, this is a card that requires board, which can be good with like totems floating around. We've seen piranhas floating around, but that is a conditionality check on this card where you have to make sure you have multiple minions available for it to feel good. If you're using it for, kind of offensive, proactive self cards, but if you're using it on your opponent's cards, this could be a little bit more useful if you try to find some cool board clear, or like we looked at that Cold Storage. So this is an interesting little toolkit card that might be okay for like decks that have slower game plans, control decks that are okay to kind of pause and do fancy things and weave cards like this into turns. For decks that have more proactive game plans, that have things they're trying to achieve very specifically, I suspect a card like this just really won't find room. But as a nature spell existing in the nature pool, that's relevant. Seems like one of those cards that's just in there and does fun, cool things. Sometimes you generate it, but maybe not a card we run a ton in constructed decks. And then finally here we have the cute little Shockhopper, a new 1-mana 1/2 elemental beast. Battlecry, get a random overload card. And of course, we've seen various overload synergy things happening in Shaman in this set, and actually the last one as well in Festival. So we've got like Thorum unlocking overloaded cards, we had Inza discounting overloaded cards, and we've gotten some new overload cards as well. which came along. But you know, the results in the overload pool, I think, are still you know, kind of across the board. Sometimes it's like a little bit of minion damage, sometimes it's face damage, sometimes it's like defensive stuff and healing and board clear, and in essence, you don't know what you're gonna get, and it's not always gonna be something that you need. You know, if you try to play this in an aggressive deck, you're gonna get Lightning Storm sometimes. It's gonna be like, ah, man, that didn't really feel very good. Play this in a control deck to generate value. Sometimes you're gonna get Lightning Bolt, and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, man, that didn't feel very good. And then sometimes you're gonna get things that are just maybe like really expensive and awkward to play. Like we talked about that criminal lineup before. Like, if I get this, like, oh god, I just wasted my Shock Hopper. So I worry that the band of results is a little bit too broad for this card to feel like it's contributing to a deck's game plan on average. And, you know, playing it down on board doesn't feel especially good early on either. So seems just a little bit too inconsistent for a generator like this. If it were a Discover card, I think we'd be in a different conversation. We'd be talking about a really interesting little tool. But as it stands with a random overload card, I'm not sure this gets there. Just kind of feels like a bit of a throwaway. All right, so moving on over to Demon Hunter. We got, of course, 3 new cards here, and these are kind of support for the card draw package that we got in Titans, which hasn't really seen a lot of play. You might need a bit of a refresher, frankly, on these, like I did. The Argonite Golem has +1 attack for each card you've drawn this turn. There's momentum, give your hero +4 attack this turn, costs 1 less for each card you've drawn this turn. So basically like attack scaling based on card draws, a little bit reminiscent of the Demon Hunter quest line actually of old. That gave you discounts and stuff though, which I think ultimately was much better than this particular draw package. But this extra 3 cards here I think are going to help support that a little bit. I'm not actually convinced just yet though that it's going to be enough to get that deck there. I feel like both the Relic side of Demon Hunter and the Outcast side of Demon Hunter feel like they're doing just faster, better things. But let's talk about it. This is Sigil of Time, a return of the Sigils, which I always thought were pretty cool cards. It's a 3-mana fell spell. At the start of your next turn, draw 3 additional cards. So that would put you at 4 total cards on that next turn because you're drawing 3 extra. That, as you can see, already enables a lot of stuff. Like momentum that we just looked at is now 1 mana. In that case, any extra draw immediately pushes that to 0. So this is kind of helping you stack up all of your draws at once to have that kind of big burst of draws counting multiple times. And then, you know, you're hopefully popping off and going for some big damage hits or whatever other bonus effects you might be looking for. Now, that's cool for that, but that's bad in every other scenario. Usually when we draw cards, we want to draw them now. We want to have choices now. We need to find things to do now. If you're in a late game situation with nothing to do and you draw this, you're passing your turn, basically. You're just setting up for later, which sucks. So we, as Hearthstone players, tend to always prefer a card draw that is immediate and gives us options and choices now to help fix problems with our hand and give us ways to react to game states. So from like an efficiency standpoint and from an immediacy standpoint, this card is not very good in general use cases. I don't think it is only going to be good specifically when you're able to reap some enormous benefit from all of that draw being stacked up all at once so that you can basically front load your mana and still draw cards that are having to spend for it in a future turn. And that could potentially set up like some big lethal push turns, some big extra damage turns, as we're going to see an additional card here that gives us extra ways to do lots of damage when we draw tons of cards. So in other words, this becomes a really limited sort of synergy tool that doesn't necessarily make it unplayable. Sometimes that's the best cards when they enable awesome synergies. It just has I think low deck diversity. It's not going to be played in a lot of places. But let's talk about one more card here. So yeah, this is Mindbender, and this feels like a, you know, another synergy piece for this draw a bunch of stuff and kill your opponent kind of plan. It's a 4-mana 4/4 battle cry. Deal 1 damage for each card you have drawn this turn. So you know, with our previous card, that's immediately 4 damage dealt. And I guess I'll just go ahead and tease this guy as well too. This is another way to gain plus attack, but a little bit less about card draw in this case. So, you know, potentially big pop-offs in the kind of mid to late game where you deal 5, 6 with this guy. I don't think dealing 5 or 6 is enough to make this card feel super compelling, though. We've actually seen other cards in that mold do similar sorts of damage without needing quite as much conditionality or setup, or having such a specific turn in which they do the most amount of damage. So I think for this to feel like it's a win condition or a big finisher, it probably needs to be doing like 7, 8, 10 damage to feel really good about it. Now, you know, that's possible. We've got the card Glaive Tar in standard. This is a way you juice this up with outcast cards, get this to draw 10 cards, right? Then you hit for 4 or whatever other attack buffs you might have, you know, and then you rip your Mindbender. It's a Pyroblast basically for 4 mana, which I think is actually kind of scary. You know, this is not a fortunate sort of card to run in an outcast deck, being fairly expensive. It's the kind of card that sits in hand, which can clog up your outcasts a little bit. But you don't necessarily always have to actually get the benefit of the outcast to support things like this. This just works anyway. You don't have to actually activate the outcast. And sometimes if you're feeding into a big game plan, maybe it's okay if your outcasts kind of whiff, as long as you're setting up for that kind of lethal blow. Halveria does that now with minions on board, but this could be a from hand solution. So listen, I think doing this sort of honestly, in other words, like kind of just trickling 3 or 4 cards at a time, and you know, playing it straight for the best part of that. So I don't know the right way to say that, but just kind of, you know, doing it like card by card, time after turn doesn't seem like it gets there. You know, in other words, 4 or 5 damage on this isn't enough. But using this as some kind of crazy OTK setup where you concoct just obscene amounts of damage, that sort of thing actually scares me a lot for a card like this, especially in wild format. With like quest lines and like, I don't even know, wild. Have fun with this. This looks scary and wild. This seems like the kind of card that gets broken and wild immediately. But in standard, I could still actually see this being the kind of finisher that does look really spooky with cards like Glaive Tar. So I wouldn't write this one off. At a surface level, at face value, I'm not sure it's great, but if you dig a little deeper and start thinking about the kind of concoctions that are possible for this one, it does get kind of scary kind of fast. And then finally here we have the Serenite Shambler, a 2-mana 2/3 elemental battlecry. If you've cast 5 or more spells this game, give your hero +4 attack this turn. So a little cheap way to get some bonus attack buff here attached to a body. I will say the fact that it's attached to a body isn't really all that exciting to me. Usually if you're going for big attack values like this, you're kind of shipping it face and hoping to end the game, especially if you're trying to combine it with something like a Wind Fury Ignis weapon, where of course attack buff scaling can be doubled up for their effective lethality given that Wind Fury aspect. You won't really necessarily care about the 2/3 so much, and I feel like Demon Hunter has other cheap ways to buff attack historically that have worked better, and maybe even currently as well. So like Momentum can just probably be 0 mana way to do the same sort of effect, but if you just need a critical mass of these, that could contribute extra damage. That said, the condition on this means this is really hard to play in the early game. It's never going to feel very good to play early on. You're going to need this to come down, who knows, turn 5, 6, 7 probably, to be really safe on average for the result of this to work. And I think that's just a little too late. I think that comes down too far gone. So for me, awkward conditionality, the on a stick factor of this isn't necessarily very useful, and I feel like Demon Hunter just has better ways to do the same sort of thing. Infested Watcher is a 2-star card. Conductivity is a 3-star card. Shockhopper is a 2-star card. Sigil of Time is a 2-star card. Mindbender is a 4-star card. Serenite Shambler is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Let me know what you think about these cards down in the comments below. Thanks so much, as always, for watching. Stay tuned for more reviews, and until next time, game on.